It's our 11th annual Mary Bowerman Science Research Colloquium. So thank you all for coming. My name's Sean Burke. I'm the Land Programs Director here at Save Mount Diablo. I'm super psyched on our lineup today of speakers. We got a really stacked lineup today. And, you know, it's an honor to be here with all of you to be able to experience this and learn from everyone here. So, you know, how cool is that we get to be here with each other today? I'd like to thank first, you know, our Mary Bowerman Science Research Committee for helping make this a reality. We have this fantastic grant program that we do every year. It's incredible to be here with all of you today and talk about some pretty incredible species that we have in our backyard. And some of them are here in our backyard, some of them are further away, you know, in other parts of the Americas. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But yeah, pretty fantastic. Really quickly, I'd like to thank the Sanderson Foundation for making this possible. Of course, our organization, Save Mount Diablo, California State Parks, East Bay Regional Park District, and of course the connection we have with UC Berkeley and Mary Bowerman, our founder, being from there, and many of our employees and partners and committee members are all UC Berkeley alum or UC alum. So thank you all for coming here today, and without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Seth, our Land Conservation Director. He's a good friend of mine, a colleague, and a fine gentleman. So he's going to give a quick little update for people. Quick.
Hey everybody, thank you for coming. 38 years ago, I was hired as Save Mount Diablo's first staff person. Now we have 24 or 25, and we're one of the top 10 land trusts in California. We've got an amazing thank you video that our communications team did, and that's going to be most of my presentation, but I just wanted to clue you in on a few great pieces of news before we move on to that little video. 5 years ago in Bay Nature magazine, we predicted that the Diablo Range would be California's next great conservation story, and I'm telling you, it's proving to be true. In Measure A this year, which we helped pass in San Benito, we added a new layer of protection to the biggest piece of the Diablo Range, an area almost as big as the East Bay. It's a game changer. In Prop 4, the climate bond that was passed in the November ballot as well, for the first time, there's $80 million in funding for the Diablo Range/San Andreas linkage. That could protect 25,000 acres, depending on price. It could protect 100,000 acres. With matching funding, it could protect even more. This year in the Diablo Range, or in wildlife connection pieces to the Diablo Range, 10,000 acres have been protected. That's half the size of Mount Diablo State Park, and the most recent piece is the 4 square mile Strathern Reserve, which is the newest UC natural reserve. It's in an area called Consabi, just east of Hollister. That area, which is a big, huge volcanic field, is one of the premier places in the entire Diablo Range, and that property is next to the single largest ranch left in the entire Diablo Range, which is 65,000 acres. In play, in negotiation, or in option right now are 45,000 acres of the Diablo Range. That's an area 50% larger than San Francisco. Next week, we're announcing our newest wildlife collaboration with the Fresno Zoo for the federally endangered blunt-nosed leopard lizard. So look out for that press release. It's going to be exciting. This is another charismatic endangered species that, unlike a number of the species first listed in the 1960s, this one has still been declining, but we're going to help turn that around. We have 85 days to complete the fundraising for our Ginocchio Schwendel Ranch. We're also in our year-end appeal fundraising period right now, so if you're imagining donating to Save Mount Diablo for all the great work we do, now is the time. 2024 has been amazing. 2025 will be epic. Thank you.
After 8 years of work, we formally expanded our scope of advocacy to all 12 counties in Mount Diablo's 200-mile Diablo Range this year. With your support, our Discover Diablo series offered 36 free outdoor excursions to the public this year. And we removed 2 tons of debris from our recently acquired property, the Balzerzak inholding within Mount Diablo State Park. We are also opening 2 new public trails in our Curry Canyon Ranch this month. Visitors will now have access to more of Knobcomb Point Road and Curry Cave Road, which will create good loop options with various Mount Diablo State Park trails. This year, you helped us connect hundreds of students to nature with our Diablo conservation experience and other education programs. You enabled us to create and put on our website 3rd to 5th grade outdoor education curricula for teachers to use at our Mangini Ranch Educational Preserve. And because of you, we brought more than 70 kids outside to care for oak trees, all as part of our new Young Diablo Explorers program. We were thrilled to see so many people participate in our annual BioBlitzes, which resulted in more than 1,000 observations and recorded hundreds of species. Thanks to you, we helped pass the statewide climate bond, Proposition 4, which includes the first funding program for the Diablo Range, and will protect huge swaths of wildlife habitat in the Diablo Range and across California. With your support, we also helped pass Measure A in San Benito County, which contains a significant portion of the Diablo Range. Measure A is a game changer that will slow county development and give residents a voice for smart growth. You helped us launch a campaign and lawsuit against the City of Dublin's misleading Measure II, which threatens the open space and urban limit line between Dublin and Livermore. With your support, at the former Concord Naval Weapons Station, Brookfield Properties was chosen as master developer, and a term sheet was adopted with 69% parks and open space. Because of you, we helped stop expansion of the John Smith landfill in San Benito County. Thanks to your contributions, we were able to install wildlife cameras and a solar-powered water trough to support wildlife in summer, and we're working hard to improve habitat for our American badgers, Chinook salmon, monarch butterflies, western pond turtles, and more. Your efforts make a huge difference for wildlife. This year, with your support, we helped pay for and support the tracking of a flock of 7 condors soaring around Mount Diablo, a new milestone in their recovery. Condor visits 4 years in a row prove the entire Diablo Range is a critical wildlife corridor. GPS trackers for some of the condors were provided by Save Mount Diablo's Mary Bowerman Science and Research Program, which is helping the Pinnacles Condor Recovery Program bring these birds back from the edge of extinction. Thanks to you, we're working hard to raise the funds to purchase the Ginocchio Schmundel Ranch, which will protect biodiversity in the Marsh Creek area and foster connections with Contra Costa's most important landowning family. We've also completed 3 mapping projects to better guide our strategic vision, and we're 1 payment closer to finishing our purchase of North Peak Ranch on the slopes of Mount Diablo by 2026. After 3.5 years of work, we premiered Fire, Drought, Rain, and Hope, 3 wild years in the Diablo Range, the first full-length movie about the Diablo Range. With your support, we made progress with California State Parks through our Break the Logjam campaign to transfer new properties and trails to Mount Diablo State Park. There is so much more to do, and none of it would be possible without you. Heartfelt thanks from all of us at Save Mount Diablo.
Okay, so my presentation is going to be on the nesting behavior in a population of western pond turtles. So to dive right in for background information, their historical range is from southern British Columbia, Canada, down to Baja California, Mexico, but their conservation status varies within the United States. They are endangered in Washington, threatened in Oregon, and then a species of special concern in California, but they are actively under review to become federally listed. They are California's only native freshwater turtle, and they're actually split into 2 subspecies. You have the northwestern pond turtle and the southwestern pond turtle, and they face a variety of threats, including habitat fragmentation and urbanization, invasive species such as your red-eared sliders and your bullfrogs, and then climate change that leads to droughts and mass die-outs and reduced reproduction, which has been seen and documented in California. One thing that I always like to add in is that Western pond turtles were actually once a part of the food trade. So it was estimated that 524,100 Western pond turtles were harvested for turtle soup for restaurants in San Francisco. Oh, oh, there we go. Between the years 1863 and 1931, and these are just the numbers that were reported, so it's hard to fathom the amount of Western pond turtles that were harvested that went unreported. And with them being a long-lived species that reproduce relatively slowly, these numbers are devastating and can be hard to overcome. But on to a more positive note, our field site is in Livermore, California. It is a 5,000-acre cattle ranch with spring-fed perennial stock ponds. It's actually owned by Zone 7, the water agency, but it's leased by Paul Banky, the rancher. And due to the location of the field site, we fall into the Bay Area where the two subspecies actually meet. So we have northwestern pond turtles with hybrid southwestern pond turtles. And there have been no prior studies at this field site, so we're actually conducting a lot of studies all at the same time. So we're doing disease and genetics, habitat use using solar-powered GPS units, and then of course our nesting project. I do want to talk a little bit about our nesting project, which aims to track turtles to better understand their movements, and then the main portion of my talk will be able to identify nesting female locations, but both goals are to use new data to help make informed conservation decisions. So for our GPS trackers, we have 5 males with trackers at the Patterson Ranch. In total, we have about 20 with GPS transmitters because it's a part of a larger project with East Bay Regional Parks, SWAIM, and the ACRCD. But with our GPS trackers, we're actually able to check their location whenever we want by looking at an app on our phone. And to no one's surprise, this is a lot of what we saw. So this is one male turtle's movement across almost an entire year. He never really left the pond, maybe except to bask on the edges a little bit. Shocking, right? Even US Fish and Wildlife says that males will typically stay in situ, especially when females are leaving to nest. And that kind of made us question if we made the right choice by buying expensive transmitters. But we were actually able to document some cool extremes. For example, male ABJ, who traveled an estimated 1.71 kilometers. So experts say that when a turtle leaves a pond, the max distance is 500 meters, and that when they leave a pond, they prefer in-water movement, such as following drainages. However, male ABJ does not follow this framework. In fact, when leaving the pond, he left the creek that had water in it in order to scale a hill that was over 100 meters in elevation. I know this because Farley and I actually hiked it together. It was not easy. He went overland, through grassland, and oak forest, and down a ravine. Unfortunately, we lost coverage of his GPS unit, but the story doesn't end here. He was later found by campers at the same exact campground that we stay at during our nesting season. So he left the creek, went uphill through a ravine, through what we assumed the reservoir, up another creek, and then entered a brand new watershed. So it's estimated he traveled 6.53 kilometers, which breaks the record for the turtle that traveled 5 kilometers in Washington. But what was great about this is that male ABJ was just one of a few turtles with their GPS transmitters that broke the quote-unquote standard behavior that you read about of Western pond turtles in literature. So what we're learning is that turtle movement is complicated, but GPS is allowing us to see unique behaviors that would otherwise go unobserved. And with the species about to be listed, it's important that we collect this data because we're learning that not all turtles are the same, and we may not know as much as we think we do. But with our GPS, or now that I've talked about GPS transmitters, I want to talk about our VHF. And unlike GPS, where we can collect all of our data remotely, VHF, we had to be out in the field for 5 weeks every day, which meant learning ranch rules and how to operate all the cattle gates. So this is what a typical day at the pond looked like with the cattle present. When we were really lucky, the bull would make an appearance to remind us who's boss. But the pond itself is amazing and full of life. There are killdeer. We have a lot of large, healthy, red-legged frogs. We've seen about 5 or 6 hatchlings, which never happens. You don't see hatchlings very often. We've watched the aquatic garters eat the newt's tail first, which was interesting. But we have no red-eared sliders and no bullfrogs. But with no prior knowledge, we didn't know what to expect when it came to nesting season. We didn't know where females would nest, or honestly, how many females were going to nest, if any. So we monitored one stock pond for the entire month of June using VHF telemetry. We were typically out in the field from 3 to 8:30 p.m. We had this weird 8:30 p.m. deadline because the campsite we were staying at actually had an entrance curfew, which I never experienced before. But we had 15 transmitters. We were able to reuse some of them, so we tracked 20 turtles, exposed their nests, and collect nest site characteristics. So this map is from the summer of June. So successful nests are in green, failed nests are in red, and then we have a double clutch in blue. So majority of our turtles nested on the bottom south hill. We did have 5 turtles that nested up creek. Those 5 that nested up creek actually utilized the creek as a path, but only the southwest creek or the creek on the left had water in it. So for our preliminary data, we exposed 20 nests and one was our double clutch. So our first female to nest was also our last female to nest. She nested on June 6th and then again on June 26th. And her 2 nests were less than 2 meters apart, or 6 feet 6 inches, which is great implications of nest site fidelity and philopatry. And then for our nest site characteristics, our average distance to the creek was 9.5 meters. We took average distance to the creek for the 5 turtles that nested up creek, since we believe that when the hatchlings emerge, they'll actually utilize the creek, and it's possible that they'll stay in the creek because it can serve as great microhabitat before traveling back down to the pond. Our average distance to nearest tree canopy was 17.8. Our average percent ground vegetation was 92.4%. They nested in a variety of grasses and thistle. And then our aspect was north facing. So these nest site characteristics were pretty standard, which is great. But just like male ABJ, the story doesn't end here. We then took average distance to the pond, which was 47.7 meters. Our furthest nest was over 153 meters away. And when you compare this to literature in California, this is a little bit on the high side. Our average height of grass was 79.2 centimeters. One nest had over 121 centimeters of grass. And this is extremely high, when you compare it to other literature. And then lastly, our average slope was 46.3%. And if you see the pattern here, this is extremely high when you compare it to other literature. There's a study that says that they actually prefer a slope of less than 15 degrees. So just like what we're seeing with GPS data, what we're seeing at this field site is not what we're reading in the literature. So I think it's important to note that there is limited published research, especially on nesting behavior and nest site characteristics. And these turtles, with their plasticity and ability to occupy varying habitats and microhabitats, it can lead to varying behavior. And so it can be difficult to generalize their habitat use. So it's important that we keep studying these small fragmented populations so we learn more about them and their needs. This is that South Hill. On the left is a female in the Southwest Creek before she goes uphill to nest. On the right is another nest marked by this blue flag, and then the creek bed on the left that she walked up. And while we were out in the field for a while, we were able to collect important observations. So typically, the western pond turtles left between 3:45 and 6:30 p.m. to nest. This depended on the temperature of the day. So on hotter days, they emerged later. On cooler days, they emerged earlier. We found 65% failed at their first attempt at nesting, and this is due to the compaction of the soil and how hard the ground is. There were some that would dig for 4 hours and only dig a 2x2 inch cavity. And it was even hard for us to hammer in nails for the exclosures. We found that most western pond turtles buried themselves beneath the grass or dirt while actively nesting. This actually made me super nervous while tracking them. I was afraid I was actually gonna step on them or disturb them. I remember one time I was convinced that I lost a transmitter and it fell off. And I remember seeing the tip of the transmitter sticking out of the dirt, and I go to pull it, and I was met with resistance. And I pushed back all of this dirt, and she was buried beneath the dirt nesting. 15 out of the 20 western pond turtles stayed on the nest overnight. This created a lot of questions. We're not sure if they continue nesting in the night or if they stop and resume in the morning. We also don't know when they go back to the pond, if they go back as soon as it's light out or if they wait to warm up. But none of the nests were depredated, which is extremely rare. Especially since 15 out of the 20 weren't exclosed until later the next day in the afternoon. We have a running theory for this, and that due to the mixture of the soil, that it's possible that there's so much cow urine and feces in the soil that when the turtles release their bladder, it still smells more like cattle than it smells like turtle, so it's not really alerting to the predators. We don't really know how to prove this yet. And then lastly, most nests were improperly covered and had little to no plugs, leaving the top eggs exposed. So when western pond turtles nest, they create a muddy seal that seals off the cavity and protects the eggs. And a lot of these nests were missing that, which is abnormal and alarming. And we're not sure if it's because they run out of energy while nesting and they can't complete it, or because the soil's so compact that they use up their entire bladder at the beginning and that there's nothing to form the plug at the end. So on the left is a female nesting. You can kind of see her transmitter and then a little bit of her shell. But on the right is typically what we were dealing with. And in between those two blue flags is a female nesting. And you'd actually have to peel back all of those layers of grass in order to find her. This is an example of a failed nest. These are two separate nests, both missing the plug. So those top two eggs are circled in red. We're not sure how this is going to impact individual nest success or how the temperatures of the nests are going to vary and how that's going to impact their recruitment. But all of this to say is that it's important that we continue new and prevalent research to better understand these species, and then we can use this data to deploy effective management practices such as larger buffer zones, better soil management, or regulation and restoration of pond ecosystems and riparian habitat. And with our first field season, we learned a lot, but also left a lot more questions than answers. So we have a lot of future research goals that we hope to accomplish later down the line. So we want to conduct a soil analysis. I think it's really important that we understand the soil compaction, the soil moisture, and the soil type, so we can better understand what this habitat is like for them and if there's anything we can do to help. We're curious about the nest site cavities, and if at this field site, if they're smaller than other field sites, and if females that are larger are actually able to dig deeper nests. We've discussed with Oakland Zoo doing a head starting program. We want to put in temperature loggers and figure out individual nest success and sex ratios, especially since this field site is so different. Next summer and spring, we're going to set up camera traps so we can figure out when the females actually go back to the pond and then to see when the hatchlings emerge. And then lastly, I'm curious about our emergence temperatures. So we know that females emerge later when it's hot and they emerge earlier when it's cold. So I'm curious how temperatures impact their physiology while they're nesting. But we could not do any of this amazing work, of course, without any of our amazing collaborators. So I just want to give a big thank you to everybody, and hopefully I can answer any questions.
Was you able to establish any correlation around grazing practices and nesting success, and how to advise ranchers and other areas nearby how to manage their landscape?
We haven't gotten to that point yet. We're waiting into the spring to see how, honestly, the nests are, we're waiting to see when the hatchlings emerge and how cattle presence impacts the success of them hatching. So we know already that it's difficult for them to dig nests, but we also don't know with the cattle always being at the field site if that impacts, like if the eggs are still intact or not. But there's still things that we're discussing when it comes to grazing practices. But we want to look into like trampling first a little bit too, because that will also depend on it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Do you actually know that predators find turtle nests by smelling turtle urine?
Yeah, it's like an olfactory cue. There's actually a study in the South where they put wolf urine on sea turtle nests, and it actually prevented coyotes from depredating the nests. Yeah.
How long can a western pond turtle stay out of the water?
Probably a couple days, and they'll be okay. Yeah.
So hi everyone, I'm a PhD student here at UC Berkeley, and I'm going to be here to talk about centipedes. Let's see. So first I want to give you sort of like an idea about the habitats that I'm sort of studying, and definitely is in the soil, as you can tell. So this image is from baynature.org, the magazine Soil Matters. And I think it was a really wonderful illustration to sort of like show you the complexity of soils, because most people I feel like don't appreciate soil as much because they think it's just dirt, but in fact there's so much life in soil. Thousands of species can be in like 1 meter of soil. And in this example image, some species could be like the springtails, these mites over here, there's earthworms, survivins, and nematodes, and of course a lot of fungi and bacteria and all these other microorganisms in the soil as well. And up here, there's centipedes, the ones that I'm studying, but in this image, it only shows the centipedes up here, but in fact, they can actually go and different species can go deeper into the soil because they're eating all these little critters in there. So I want to ask you all a question, and I want you to think about this, like based on your own experiences and observations. How many species of centipedes are there in California? Like anyone want to raise their hand and shout out an answer? Don't be shy. 100. Any other answers? 1,000. Ooh, that's a big number. 3. All right. So we got range of numbers. Range of numbers. Let's see who gets the closest. First, I'm going to introduce you to some of the common centipedes that a lot of you might have seen before. So this is the house centipedes, and they belong in the order Scutigiromorpha. So if you've ever seen these in your houses, you might be afraid of them. But they're pretty much harmless, and they're good for your house because they're eating all the pests around. But these are very distinctive because of their long legs and long antennae. And another group of centipedes that you might be familiar with are the tropical centipedes or the bark centipedes. And these species in this order generally have around 21 to 23 pairs of legs. And some species can actually go up to like 12 inches, which is about, like, I actually measured my arm to see exactly the 12 inches that it was from the palm of my hand to my elbow. So that's how big some of these centipedes can get. But those, luckily, we don't have those that get that big around here in California. That's mostly for like in tropical regions like in Brazil. The species here, Scolopendra polymorpha, gets around only 3 to 4 inches out in the wild. And even like if they bite you, it won't be like hard, like it won't like, I guess, kill you. So that's good to know, right? So in terms of species diversity, the house centipedes, there's only really 1 or 2 species here, both introduced. And then for the tropical centipedes, there's 8 species. So we got 10 species so far. So more than 3. All right, so the next group, soil centipedes. These are one of the groups that I'm working on. And these are really long and skinny, and they have a lot of legs, 27 to 191 pairs of legs. And some species can reach up to 6 inches. And in terms of species diversity, there's around 60 in California. And then the other group, and other order in California that I'm also working on is the stone centipedes. So these always have 15 pairs of legs as adults, and most species are actually pretty small. So if you can imagine a quarter size, most species won't be bigger than a quarter. But one species in California does get up to at least 2 quarter sizes. And here's 2 species in California that you can find in Southern California, Gossypias paucilidens and Gossypias monicus. And the species diversity for this group is 80. So we have around 150 species in California. And I'll give points to whoever got between 100 to 1,000. So there's 150 recorded species, but I've personally found over 30 species of these centipedes in California. So there's a lot of undiscovered diversity out there. And I estimate there to be probably over 200 species in California. So worldwide, there's around 3,000 species. So if we just take that into consideration, California has about 6% of all the centipede diversity in the world. And here are my sampling sites that I did within the Mount Diablo Range, the Diablo Range. So Curry Canyon, San Antonio Valley Ecological Reserve, Blue Oak Ranch Reserve, Griswold Hills, and Laguna Mountain. And at these sites, the most species diversity I found was at Curry Canyon with 13 species, followed by Blue Oak Ranch Reserve, 10 species, and then Griswold Hills, 9 species. So in terms of habitat, a lot of these are like oak forest, grasslands, and right here in Griswold Hills, more like arid, sort of with junipers and ephedras. And here's like a species list of the things that I found. And you can see sort of like a pattern here that there's more species of soil centipedes, 18 species found throughout the range. And then 9 species of, that should be stone centipedes, not soil centipedes. And then I examined over 180 specimens, and they represent about 29 species that we found so far. And there's only 2 species of Scolopendromorphos. So here's sort of like a sort of an image to show you the size compared to a penny of these centipedes that you get. And a lot of these are, I mean, this is the Scolopendra polymorpha, but a lot of these actually get very, very small. And these are often overlooked. So as you can imagine, they're that small. So yes, of course, you're going to be overlooking them. But so then there's a couple of undescribed species. Let me go back to this. Let's see. Like this one, for example, if it's Espinolf, that means that's an undescribed species. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 undescribed species so far within the Mount Diablo range. So looking back at this image, like if you can imagine the habitat, you see all these centipedes in there, what exactly are they doing? Like how's there so many different species of centipedes occupying the same habitat? And a lot of people have asked me that, so I wanted to like share sort of like some insight into that. So here's an example of a centipede. Here's the mouth, the ventral side, and this is the forcepials, what you're seeing here, or they're also called the poison claws. But these aren't actually the mouth. That's like a modified leg appendage that they have adapted to sort of use to catch prey with. And when they attack the prey, they will inject the venom with these claws over here. So that's the forcepials, and then below the forcepials is this maxilla part over here. And oftentimes when I'm like looking at these centipedes, I have to dissect the heads. So thousands of centipede heads in my house that I have to look through. And this maxilla can be divided into 2 other parts, the first maxilla and the second maxilla. And the first maxilla, you notice that it's like this. So an analogy for this part is like the tongue in that it manipulates the food. And then the second maxilla, you see that as a little hook on the end. That's more for like holding on to the prey while they're eating the food. And then below the maxilla is this part over here, the labrum and the mandibles. So the mandibles is analogous to like the lip, and that also helps with holding on to the prey. And the mandibles is analogous to the teeth that we have, and that it uses these to chew up and crush prey items. So one of the things that's important about these mandibles is that it's very informative in terms of morphology, because it tells us what families or what groups of species belong in. So some species in these families have lamella that look like this, but then other ones have actually like teeth to them, and this sort of like shows the diversity of how they're eating, because if you have teeth, you can capture prey that have like harder exoskeletons, whereas if you have like this brush texture to the mandible, you'll be eating more of the soft arthropods or like annelids and worms. And here's a study that was done by Bortolin et al. And they showed that when they analyzed the gut contents for these 3 groups, the earthworms, the springtails, and flies, they found like various proportions in their diet. So these centipedes aren't all eating the same thing. They can have like specific groups that they're specialized in. And that's how they're sort of like coexisting together because they're not all eating the same resource. They're sort of have their own different species that they're eating within the habitat. So that's the end of my presentation. I want to thank my advisor, Kip, and my lab for helping me collect specimens, and also to Marshall Hayden and Wyatt Mendez because they've also provided me with specimens, but also definitely to you all, CMU Mount Diablo, and to the Mary Bowerman Science and Research Program, and to iNaturalist for providing me with data points on centipedes, and also to the Ecology Museum because they also have specimens there. Yeah, I'll take questions now. Yep. Yes, yes. It has a species that hasn't been discovered yet and hasn't been like formally have a name to it. So for generally, the average time for when a species is being discovered to when it's actually being described is around like 10 years. So it's a very long process, and especially it's a long process for groups that are very understudied because then, like for my group, but I would have to figure it out first. Like for example, if I wanted to describe a species of Tayuna, so this is mouth parts of Tayuna, and this genus is very similar to another genus, Arctogeophilus, but the difference between those two genera is just this labrum meeting in the middle or not. So I mean, can you really define a genus based on this one character? So that's one of the things I have to figure out is if the morphology matches with, say, for example, genetic data to see if the trees that we get DNA shows like monophyletic groups. Yeah.
I can imagine that there's a lot of benefits for centipedes, but could you elaborate on that a little bit? And are there beneficial applications for agricultural sciences to enhance soil?
So when it comes to soil, I believe in like the balance. That's how you keep the soil healthy is if you have balance of animals that thrive in there. So centipedes are generalist predators, and some of them may be more specific towards other prey. But let's say, for example, if there's a springtail here and there's no like predator eating them, then they can get out of control and start eating a lot of fungi instead. So in terms of like applications, you can definitely use like centipedes as like top-down control of these other smaller or microorganisms. Yeah. That's a very good question, and I don't think a lot of people, especially for centipedes, no one's really studied like the correlation between soil type to the diversity of centipedes. But I definitely do believe that it has an impact on how much species there are. But then again, one spot I found in Los Angeles County, I found like 14 different species all within like a meter of each other, and the habitat didn't really look ideal. It was like very dry. So there could be something else going on in there. But generally, when it comes to that many species, I would expect there to be all different diversity of prey types in there as well.
Good morning. Great to be here. I want to thank you all for inviting me. It's really a great honor and pleasure to come and talk to you about rock pools. And I also want to thank the staff. I know how much work it takes to organize and plan these kinds of colloquia, and so thank you for all your work. I also want to acknowledge Julia Martin, who really drove and collected a lot of this data, and she is finishing her first semester as a PhD student at Rice University in Texas, but she was an undergraduate working in my lab. Now, I do work on vernal pools. I work on the community ecology of vernal pools, but what I'm going to talk to you today about is kind of maybe a cousin of vernal pools, the rock pools. And rock pools are these ephemeral freshwater ponds that occur in depressions in rock substrata. So here in the Diablo Range, this is sandstone, these sandstone rock outcroppings that occur throughout the range. They vary incredibly in size. There are some the size of like basketballs, and some that are like swimming pool size. These pools occur, these rock pools occur throughout the world. It's pretty rare habitat, but widespread. And they are incredibly important in many parts of the world, both culturally and ecologically. Culturally, because especially in the drier parts of the world, they're used as a water source. And they're also ecologically important because there are many species found in these rock pools that are found nowhere else. But as a whole, they are rare and they're widespread, but they're severely understudied. Here in the Diablo Range, I've been working with Doug Bell at East Bay Regional Park District for almost like 15 years or so, where we've been studying the invertebrate species in rock pools and water quality and so forth. And there are a number of endangered and threatened fauna, and these have been the focus of our studies. They include Branchionecta longiantenna, which is a federally endangered species, and Branchionecta lynchi, which is a federally threatened species. And so we've been studying these species. Longiantenna are, uh-oh. All right, there we go. They are very rare throughout California. They're only found from about 5 sites, whereas lynchi is pretty widespread, and again, those patterns of distribution and abundance are also found in these rock pools. And again, we're going to move on. This is a long story for another time, these species in rock pools. Also in rock pools, you find California tiger salamanders, which we have not studied specifically, but they are found from, uh-oh, am I doing something wrong? Okay. Okay, so these rock pools they don't occur in a vacuum, of course. They, just like all freshwater ecosystems, they interact with the terrestrial environment in different ways. And there have been a few studies that have looked at this, but I just want to point out that they do accumulate over time, just like ponds and lakes. They accumulate organic matter, and they can shift to being a terrestrial habitat. And so there's been a couple of studies looking at this, like the Bushke paper from about a decade ago, looking at like when and where these rock pools will get filled in by the terrestrial community. And and most studies tend to find that it's kind of the shape of the rock pool and location that results in this infilling and the rate of infilling of these pools. But the plants that actually occur in the rock pools, there have been very few studies that have been conducted on this. We know very little about these plants. If you look globally, there have been a few studies, one from Malta, one from tropical Australia, and one from from South Africa, excuse me. And they tend to just document like kind of what species are found in these rock pools. And it tends to be overall very low diversity in the rock pools compared to the vernal pools, right, which have this incredibly great diversity of wildflowers. And it tends to be related to kind of the surface area and location of the pools which determine the kinds of species and which species you find there. Okay, so the questions that were driving our project included, really first, just what plant species are associated with rock pools here in the Diablo Range. Secondly, what rock pool characteristics are associated with those plants? And then finally, are there any implications for management and restoration coming out of these patterns that we observed in rock pools? Okay, so we did wet season surveys. This was last year. We did it primarily at Brushy Peak and Vasco Caves Regional Preserve. And we were sampling the rock pools from January through March. And you can see us out there sampling rock pools. And what did we measure? We looked at the plants and algae within the rock pools, their cover and species richness, as well as the pool, not only in the pool, but also along the edge of the pools. We also measured other variables of the rock pool, including pool depth, water quality, invertebrate abundance, and richness. Okay. So the long and short of it is it's not very diverse in the rock pools. We found the one actual plant species is Calitric marginata. This is an aquatic plant. It's common to vernal pools. It's found from Baja California all the way up to British Columbia. And it tends to be associated with vernal pools and other aquatic habitats. The other common photosynthetic organism that we found in the rock pools were Cladophora, which is a filamentous algae. And what we found was those two species were positively correlated with one another. They really occurred together in half of the pools. Algae occurred alone only in 23% of the pools, whereas neither were present in 23 of the pools. So that was kind of the breakdown of the presence of these species in rock pools. Okay, so what were the ecological relationships of these organisms? Well, with marginata, we found a negative correlation with depth and chlorophyll A. And chlorophyll A, keep in mind, is representing the unicellular algae found in these rock pools, which are the primary food of fairy shrimp and the other aquatic invertebrates in the rock pools. So they were negatively correlated with one another. They were positively associated with Branchionecta lynchi. Whereas with the filamentous algae, they were negatively associated with depth, chlorophyll A, similar to marginata, but also turbidity. And here they were negatively associated with lynchi and active species abundances. So like insects, which tend to be the top predators in this system, tended to be negatively associated with the presence of algae. And then finally, they were that filamentous algae was positively associated with conductivity and longiantenna. So very interesting patterns in these associations. And just to give you a little taste of graphs, this is just depth and algae cover negatively associated, as well as Branchionecta lynchi. Now with the edge, the rock pool edge, this was also not very high diversity. It was primarily the invasive grasses. So it really reflected the surrounding grassland habitat that you see outside of the rock pools. And so bromus, avena, and so forth. You also see moss, and you see the bush monkey flower also found on the outside edges. And once in a while, and in other pools, you do see gold fields, like Lecinia californica. But few variables were associated with that edge cover. They do tend to be on kind of the lower ends of the rock pools. So they don't tend to be on the top of them, and so more connected with the surrounding grassland. But we did find positive correlations with pool nitrate and phosphate, which is not surprising because these plants are depositing all this organic matter right into the rock pool, and so increasing the nutrients, which could be a good or a bad thing. So finally, in conclusion, overall, we found low diversity in these rock pools, but there is a potential threat to pool infilling from these invasive plants. There's been a recent study by Jeff Alvarez and Contra Costa Water, who excavated rock pools and found that what came back were a lot of these invertebrate species that you find. Really brilliant work, and kind of an inspiration to Doug and I. And future work, again, like getting into the kind of the core, that these relationships between the vegetation and these rock pools, also looking at kind of the connectivity and pool shape of them as they relate to this vegetation, and also to estimate the rate of filling. And most importantly, and probably the most challenging, is ameliorating the invasive plant effects and potentially kind of doing what Contra Costa Water and Jeff Alvarez did with excavating these rock pools to provide this habitat for these endangered and threatened species found in rock pools. I've worked in many systems, and here in California and around the world, and rock pools are like my favorite habitat ever. I love this place. It's so magical. If you ever get a chance to go on one of the East Bay tours or go check it out, it's amazing. And lastly, I just want to express my gratitude to Save Mount Diablo, supporting this work, and of course, East Bay Regional Park District, and in particular, Doug Bell, and of course, Sac State, and then all the great undergraduate students and graduate students who have come out and have assisted in sampling this incredible ecosystem, and I hope you get the chance to visit it. And thank you very much for listening. Yeah.
So, did you go back later in the season to see what percentage of these rock pools dried up completely? And sort of a corollary question, given climate change and lots of rain some years and drought other years, do we know how that affects the species that occur in those pools?
Excellent questions. First, they all dry up. So they all dry up. That's the long and the short of it. And then with climate change, so the species that occur in these kinds of ecosystems, not only rock pools but also vernal pools, they're adapted to that shifting, those years with lots of rainfall and years with no rainfall. So like the invertebrates, when we're talking about crustaceans, they produce resting eggs that then just sit at the bottom of the rock pools waiting for them to fill up. And they could wait decades. They've revived those resting eggs, not from our species, but from others, hundreds of years old. So they can sit there for a long time. And with the insects, of course, they're coming, dispersing from other habitats. So, and same thing with plants, right? So they have these adaptations to that, the variation in precipitation and temperature. Now, the temperature part of the climate change, that's a little bit more complicated. And we've done some work in my lab looking at how temperature changes and just by 1 to 2 degrees. And we've found, this is some published work, that it negatively affects the threatened, endangered, endemic species like the fairy shrimp and clam shrimp and so forth. But overall, with that great variation, they tend to be pretty resilient. Yeah. The which species? Mm-mm. That was easy. Yeah. You mean on an annual basis, or like because they dry up every year? Okay, I guess. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, it tends to be pretty easy. Like it doesn't take a whole lot of rain for them to fill up. So we haven't been out there like this season, but I'm sure that huge rain we got a few weeks ago, I'm sure that inundated these. And so, and just my experience of working out there, more or less every year they do inundate on some level. Whether that inundation, how long that inundation stays present is a whole nother question, which depends, again, upon how much rainfall we get throughout the season and so forth. But over the last 15 years, pretty regularly, they fill up. Oh, you're putting in the competition with vernal pools? Yeah, I mean, yes, I would say yes, because with this system, it doesn't take a whole lot of rain for them to fill up, whereas the vernal pools, it has to build up that water table. So yes, and that brings up interesting questions about the life histories of a lot of these organisms that live in them, which is, so if anybody was looking to do a master's, that's a great, and yeah, so anyways, I'll leave it at that. But I'd be happy to talk to anybody else about this stuff during the break. Any other questions? I think we're at.
This is a state highway. It goes over across Mount Hamilton to San Jose. But in the maze of canyons and ridges of the Diablo Range, this is one of those ways to cross. And that's why it's Del Puerto. This is the door.
The Diablo Range stretches almost 200 miles from Mount Diablo in the Bay Area all the way south to Kern County. It's a sparsely inhabited stretch of the Inner Coast Range, 5 times the size of Yosemite National Park. It's rocky, rugged, and biologically rich, with species like golden eagles, mountain lions, badgers, kit foxes, and California condors. It's not well known, but in a time of climate change, it's becoming increasingly important as a refuge for plants, animals, and people. Starting from the town of Patterson in April 2023, we drove up into Del Puerto Canyon to have a look.
It's one of the most steep, gorgeous landscapes in the northern Diablo Range, incredibly rugged. And it's often windy and hot. But there's this 22-mile thread of blue-green at the bottom, Del Puerto Creek, and willows higher up, cottonwoods and sycamores lower down, and the birds are just drawn to the water and the trees, and it's an amazing biodiversity spot.
Here at the mouth of Del Puerto Canyon, conservationists have been fighting a proposal to store water from the California aqueduct.
Last year we helped stall that reservoir project. It's not dead. But we helped stall it. It would flood the lower 3 miles of this incredible canyon. It would destroy the creek down here. It would cause the road, which provides really amazing access the entire length of the creek and the canyon. It would require the road to be relocated, and it's just really to grow more almond trees.
4 scientists have come along with us to interpret the scene. Adams dubs them a Diablo Range convergence because they know as much as anybody about this mysterious place.
Having grown up in California, I was in love with eagles and raptors and falcons from day one. And back then in the 60s, if you wanted to see prairie falcons, you would come to the Del Puerto Canyon. We're going to pass through a lot of these intense rock formations, just gorgeous things where prairies used to nest. Most of them probably are no longer on the road because of the disturbance, but there's birds, right up into the hills beyond. The old falconers would talk about, oh yeah, just go to Del Puerto Canyon. There's at least 7 nests there. You can find as many prairies as you want. So, really spectacular.
Today, Del Puerto is a hot spot, not only for prairie falcons, but also for golden eagles. In fact, the northern Diablo Range, of which this canyon is a part, contains the densest nesting population of golden eagles in the world. Wildlife biologist Patrick Kohler says they have nests every 3 to 5 miles up this canyon.
It's a pretty unique population. Elsewhere in the range of golden eagles worldwide, they mostly use cliffs for nesting substrates, but in this area they use trees, and even trees that are as small as some of these blue oaks are very important to golden eagles.
And these are major predators. What is it that strikes you about golden eagles?
There's nothing they don't eat.
They can take out deer, they can take out other predators, they can take out coyotes,
And they eat a lot of carrion too. Dead cattle in the landscape, that's food. That's real good food.
Everybody knows about bald eagles, but the apex predators are golden eagles. If they were a little bit bigger, they would be eyeing us.
We wonder how the eagles fared after the Diablo Range was hit by the SCU fire in 2020, which at the time was the 3rd largest fire complex in California history. On the one hand, slopes cleared of underbrush made it easier for eagles to see their prey, but their stick nests are far from fire resistant.
We've been monitoring golden eagles in this area before and after the fire, and of the probably roughly 20 to 30 pairs that we monitor intensely, we've now documented all of those territories are still occupied. This is a very fire-adapted system.
Those eagles had to endure other challenges too. First, a withering multi-year drought, during which Bay Area cities sometimes received only half to 2/3 of their normal rainfall, followed by a winter of ferocious storms, causing floods, landslides, washed-out roads, and downed trees. Rainfall on Mount Diablo, which averages 24 inches a year, rose to nearly 70 inches. We're near the end of that rainy season now.
What do you hear the most? Water. That's just so incredible. It's flowing water. It's rushing. You think back 100 years, there were probably salmon going right up the creek behind us.
This canyon is in constant change. It would be in constant change just based on the steepness of the landscape, but it's in constant change from the wind, from the flooding, from the droughts. It's dynamic. This is the definition of dynamic.
What I particularly notice is how open the understory is now, which has opened it up for foraging by golden eagles, by prairie falcons, by great horned owls, you name it. And it's probably also made the landscape a little more movable for even larger mammals like deer. So there's a huge ecological benefit to the fire that came through here.
In a 3-year study, a team from Save Mount Diablo found remarkable changes all along this route. Del Puerto Creek switched from brown to green. Frank Rains Regional Park bounced back too and was full of fire-following plants. In woodland areas, there was even a bit of a super bloom. Closer to Mount Hamilton, chaparral had risen from the ashes while still leaving room for a fleeting abundance of wildflowers in the extra space and nutrients provided by the fire. Looking out from the top of Mount Hamilton, what was black and frosty gray in 2020 was splashed with green and yellow. In some places, skeletons left by the fire were surrounded by nothing but splendor. UC Berkeley entomologist Kip Will studied insects' response to the 2013 fire in Mount Diablo State Park. His studies yielded some fascinating basic information. 16 species of moths never before recorded in Contra Costa County, including the elegant sphinx moth with a wingspan of 4 inches. He's currently planning a new study farther south in the Diablo Range.
When we first started talking about it, I said, so what do you think you'll get, 10,000 insects? He said, no, 12,000. And I said, and how many new to science? And he said, well, I wouldn't want to speculate, but at least a dozen.
There's a really wonderful, rich, largely endemic insect fauna in the Diablo Range that is still rather poorly known, believe it or not. One of the things we do know is it has a lot of endemic plants, and a lot of insects are actually associated with particular plant groups, so that's one driver of diversity. The other thing is it really is a central part of California, not so connected to other areas. So you might be able to find more insect species in the Sierras, but they also share that diversity with the Cascades and with the Great Basin, with other areas. A piece of the insect fauna that it's really truly Californian, I think the Diablo Range is going to prove to be the largest diversity of endemic insects to California.
We know from the few places that are known well in the Diablo Range that they have incredibly high biodiversity. Mount Hamilton, Mount Diablo both have more than 10 or 15% of all of California's plants in 10 or 20,000 acre areas. Well, most of the Diablo Range hasn't been sampled, it hasn't been surveyed, it hasn't been explored, and we know that if we go to almost any of those places, we're going to find the same high levels of biodiversity, including new things that nobody has ever seen.
Walking along the 3,000-acre San Antonio Valley Ecological Reserve, managed by the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, Adams gets excited.
So when I found out there was 3,000 acres here that connected from the San Antonio Valley and the road all the way to Henry Coe State Park, that was like a gift that was being dropped down from the heavens to help with that connectivity down the whole spine of the Diablo Range.
It's important to have large chunks of landscape protected or otherwise ready to be able to adapt to the changing climate. We know that species will have to move, and if we don't have those habitat areas available to them, where are they going to go?
Our next stop is a 5,000-acre ranch on the backside of Mount Hamilton. Conservation biologist Joseph Belli doesn't own the property, but he's had permission to explore it since childhood.
I've been coming up here since 1984, I believe. Not much has really changed. It still remains the place that was amazing the first time I came up here. This creek here, if you go down far enough, it's got foothill yellow-legged frogs, rainbow trout, western pond turtles, mountain lion, tule elk, badgers, pronghorn. The pronghorn are no longer here, but one of my most cherished memories over the years has been to see a lone pronghorn in this area where we're at right now. Lately, in the last couple of years, we occasionally get condors over here. It's a really special place, and honestly, you know, I've had to kind of divorce myself from it, telling myself that you're not going to have this forever personally, because something's going to happen someday, it's going to get sold, or so I've had to tell myself, you know, find some other places because this is going to break your heart one way or the other. So
Joseph's got that heartbreak of wondering whether the place he grew up loving will be lost, and I'm just as optimistic that it will be saved.
Yeah.
So when I hear about a 5,000-acre ranch on the backside of Mount Hamilton, I think, well, that'll be a lot cheaper than on the west side of Mount Hamilton, and it'll be a lot cheaper than the properties around Mount Diablo, and it'll be a lot more cost efficient to protect these bigger ranches. And 5,000 acres, especially for the southern Diablo Range, is small. we're looking at 15,000 acre ranches and 50,000 acre ranches and 100,000 acre ranches, where the economies of scale get even more dramatic. A single project could create a whole new park. My hope is that, by the end of my saga, I will have walked on every ranch in the Diablo Range. And at some point, they'll all be threaded together down the 200-mile length of it as well, in parks or conservation easements or preservation and all kinds.
Next, most of the group heads out on an easy walk to explore the ranch. But Patrick Kohler and Doug Bell opt to bushwhack up a steep ridge. Having seen 11 golden eagles already today, they hope to find out if there are any nests here. When the group reconvenes, Kohler and Bell are sopping wet and all smiles. Adams decides to have some fun with them.
But what's our eagle count now?
It was an awesome view, and the eagle count is not important. It's the ruling out.
The eagle count has not changed, is what you're admitting.
No, it's the ruling out of potential nest tree options. So I was able to get a good view of a few trees in different areas that definitely didn't have a nest. I was able to get a good view of this north-facing slope. I can't see anything obvious.
So bottom line,
there's still more to see.
More eagles.
Nope.
But he got more information.
Could you not have just asked Joseph Belli where the nests are?
Maybe I should have done that. I think I did ask him.
Next time.
It's getting late, and weather on Mount Hamilton is deteriorating. So our Diablo Range convergence disperses, heading up and over Mount Hamilton to San Jose in separate vehicles. We'll come back on a day when the views are grand and spring is in full bloom. California State Route 130 winds for 60 miles through a classic slice of the Wild West, past creeks, meadows, shrublands, and woodlands, from sea level to more than 4,000 feet. The route follows Del Puerto Canyon Road near Patterson, then San Antonio Valley Road, and finally Mount Hamilton Road, up and down its namesake peak, ending in San Jose. The tour can take 3 to 5 hours, and is notoriously short on services, so be prepared with food and water. Hikes are possible in Del Puerto Canyon, either at Menier Day Use Area or Frank Raines Regional Park. The scenery grows spacious in the San Antonio Valley, which can be a hot spot for wildflowers in the spring. On top of Mount Hamilton, the University of California's Lick Observatory is well worth a stop. You can picnic and use the restrooms there, look at exhibits, or on certain days and nights, enjoy a tour. Another way to get to either Del Puerto Canyon or Mount Hamilton is to drive up Mines Road from Livermore. Whether you choose to venture in that way or from Patterson or San Jose, by the end of the day, you'll have a better understanding of one of the most biodiverse mountain ranges in the state.
Last year we came out here and we counted 140 species of flowering plants in like a 3-hour run through. This place is really cool. It has a mystical feeling to it when you really get into these hills and you start looking around and look at that, we found this here. Oh wow, this whole hillside has these rare Mariposa lilies I haven't seen, or wow, a roadrunner just cruised by, there goes a golden eagle. It's like there's so much going on, it's like I can't process. And you go home and you pass out. And that's awesome. It's like how many places do you get that so close to the Bay Area?
Well, thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to share some of my observations, some of my research, and my attempts to photograph wildlife and their behavior over the years. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the following individuals that have truly been an inspiration and encouragement and also supported me over that time period. This is a photograph of the Galapagos Islands, and it's in 1996 where I really developed my passion for wildlife photography. It's also a location where I was able to witness an amazing event of Galapagos, a tiny little country of Ecuador, creating a world-renowned national park and marine sanctuary. And in fact, in 2022, the tiny country of Ecuador, Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica created one of the largest marine preserves in the entire world. It's 500,000 square kilometers. To put that in perspective, that's bigger than the entire landmass of California. Incredible accomplishment during that time period. As a wildlife ecologist, this is what I look at as biological diversity. As you can see, inverts, where we heard a lot about centipedes today, and vernal pool shrimp, they dominate what biodiversity is all about. And 1.3 of those million of those inverts, 1 million are insecta. And entomologists estimate there's an additional 4.5 million insects that need to be described. So if the centipede ecologist thinks he's got a challenge, think about these entomologists. As I've been able to work with all these different taxons over the course of my career, primarily in the recovery and conservation. Oops, sorry. On the recovery, conservation, and of rare, threatened, endangered species. And today I'm going to primarily talk about birds and mammals in 3 different locations: California, Chile, and Brazil. One of my favorite species is white-tailed kite, and it's totally perplexing to me of the ability of white-tailed kites. They have feathers that are like owls. They hunt primarily small mammals, microtus, but my research shows that their hunting success rates extraordinarily low. However, somehow they're able to successfully fledge 4 and 5 young. And so if somebody can explain that to me afterwards, please do. What I have noticed, however, is recently I'm seeing a lot of these white-tailed kites nest or hunting primarily during sunset and even into the evening. So a lot of these birds that we used to think are just purely diurnal, we're watching a lot of nocturnal activity, and modern day cameras have allowed us to do that. Another raptor here that's throughout the Americas, throughout North America, Central America, all the way down the tip of Tierra del Fuego in Patagonia, is the American kestrel. And what's happened is that there's a disturbing trend taking place with the kestrels here in California along the coast. It appears that the lack of large mammalian or small mammalian prey, which they predominantly predate on elsewhere, is disappearing. And as a consequence, their wing lengths are shortening, significantly shortening in California and nowhere else. So the wing lengths of this female here in California is actually shorter than it is in Argentina, Brazil, or even other parts of North America. The aerial predator of pretty much of all time is, without doubt, is American peregrine falcon. And the recovery of this particular species is absolutely fabulous. It's one of the few birds that has truly cosmopolitan distribution. It's found in every continent except for Antarctica. They're found up in the tundra also. For the last several years, I've been monitoring 7 different peregrine eyries along the coast of California. I grew up as a raptor ecologist also. So I'm having a total blast now, again, being able to observe, photograph, and witness the recovery of this particular species. Peregrines can hit speeds of over 200 miles an hour. And here's an event of this male peregrine catching a collared dove along the coast at 100 miles an hour right in front of me. It's something that, your wildest dreams as a kid you hope to see, but in order to see it and then capture it on film is pretty remarkable. And what we noticed with some of the peregrine eyries here along the coast is that the males will go out hunting early during the nesting season, catching smaller prey items like sparrows, doves, and whatnot. And as the fledglings get bigger, the female does predominantly a lot of the hunting. And often what females are hunting along the coast here are common birds, but they're also targeting a lot of gulls, herring gulls, and even birds as large as western gulls. The last couple of years, what we've noticed also is that, especially this last year, the 6 or 7 nests that I was monitoring, only 2 coastal nests were successful. The rest just weren't, there was no nesting activity. Right now, we have no explanation why. Another bird that's here in California and elsewhere that's made a remarkable recovery, and it's another testament to the effectiveness of the Endangered Species Act, is bald eagles. And in 1997, I received a phone call saying that there's a bald eagle nesting at Del Val. Most of my colleagues thought it was a golden eagle. We wandered on down there and damned if there wasn't a bald eagle nesting at Del Val. That was the first nesting in the Bay Area in decades. Subsequent to that, bald eagles are finding a lot of different lakes and reservoirs and nesting throughout California. They're having an effect, however. What they're affecting is the distribution and nest densities of osprey. There's a lake in Marin County called Kent Lake. In the 1970s, 1980s, and early 1990s, there was at least 70 to 79 active nest sites per year of ospreys at this little lake in Marin County. It was considered the highest known densities of ospreys anywhere in the world. One pair of bald eagles moved in, and the nest densities of osprey decreased by over 50%. This particular pair here is up in Berryessa, however, and here's something that just blew us away also that we're observing this nest site. This male osprey who's constantly catching fish, he hates bald eagles and he chases them off even with fish. And I've never witnessed a bald eagle being able to swipe a fish from this particular osprey. They just aren't tolerating the eagles up there. They successfully raised three fledglings this year. Another incredible event that's happening here in the Bay Area that, to my knowledge, happens nowhere else in North America has to do with North American river otters. River otters will take crustaceans, they'll take lots and lots of different fish species, amphibians, and even small birds. 2 lagoons in the Marin County coast, they're taking brown pelicans. And one of their primary prey is brown pelicans during fall through winter. There's carcasses everywhere at these 2 particular lagoons along the coast. They're also going offshore, hunting offshore in the open ocean in the breakers catching surf scoters. Many people that go out there and see them offshore, they think they're sea otters. One of the things that's happened in California due to lack of apex predators, pumas, gray wolves, although they're starting to kind of show up again, and especially the grizzly bears, is that coyotes have been ecologically released across much of the landscape here. And one of the things we started looking at out at Point Reyes National Seashore, and I've talked to Vishal about this and several people at Berkeley, is that coyotes have been ecologically released to such a level that they're influencing the other mesocarnivores out there. For some inexplicable reason, the Point Reyes Peninsula, which is all open grasslands, scrublands predominantly, we don't see any pumas out there, even though there's high prey abundance. Instead, we're finding coyotes. In fact, the other day I was out there and we had 22 coyotes in one day we identified. What they're primarily influencing appears the hunting behavior of the bobcats. The bobcats now, instead of being more out in the open, they're hunting the open grassland and scrub edge. And if they detect a coyote, they vanish, they just disappear. So I started looking at prey efficiency, predator efficiency. And the thing that most of us carnivore biologists do, we model it after painted wolves or wild dogs that are in Africa. Here's a pair up in Kruger National Park that we were trailing. Painted wolves have a hunting efficiency rate of 70%. They're social predators, so 70% of the time they go out hunting, they successfully capture prey. It's absolutely phenomenal. So I've been comparing them to coyotes, and coyotes have much lower hunting success rate. And these modern day cameras are amazing. I don't even have to take a note. It gathers all the data in my metadata in my camera, so I'm able to have the exact time in which a coyote catches an animal, how long they've been out there catching the animal if I take a photo, and the GPS location. So the coyotes are about 30% or so hunting efficiency, at least out at Point Reyes. Bobcats are even lower. There's been several times I've been following bobcats for 8-10 hours right next to them, and they simply don't catch a bleeding thing. However, what's been really astonishing is watching badgers, and I've had at least 8 or, holy smokes, I'm going way too fast. I've had at least 8 or 10 badgers I've trailed. This particular female was 20 hunting attempts, captured prey every single time, and it ranged between 7 and 23 minutes she was catching prey. Here's some comparative data from mountain lions. I did a camera trap study here in the East Bay from 2012 to 2020. And this just shows this is up in the Hamilton Range. Mount Diablo's in the background up there. Riparian versus ridgetop, and their hunting activity up there. So, you know, when are they out hunting during the circadian rhythms? And I might have to whip through these videos. Here's a whole total different perspective of puma, you know, predatory ecology and how vicious these cats are. So here's an adult male puma. This guy's probably 150, 160 pounds. He's big. No. So it's not the ruthless predator we thought it was, right? So here's another interaction that was just absolutely astounding, captured on cameras, and this is actually courtship display, or courtship. This is an adult female. They tend to be the aggressors. The male's on the right, the female's a smaller cat on the left. She's not very taller than him right now, right? They wander off, and the reason we know this is courtship, for the next 10 days they were together, interacting with each other, and that's typical courtship display.
And where is this, Steve?
This is at Camp Ohlone along Alameda Creek.
Wow.
So during the duration of my study out there, what we also had is we had 7 different litters reproduced, and the litter size ranged from 1 to 3 cubs. And here's this adult female with a dependent male cub at about 6-7 months old. And they're just stunning animals. They're absolutely amazing. Currently, within this portion of California, they're listed as a threatened or endangered species in the state of California. So in addition to the Hamilton, I call it the Hamilton study site, that's part of the Diablo Range, however, okay? And we separated out to the Diablo study area and then the East Bay Hill study area. We ran cameras at all 3 locations for a period of 13 months. The Hamilton study area, we had 84 pumas detected. East Bay Hills, we actually had 8. What was really quite disturbing is the Mount Diablo study area, 0, with the same camera trap arrays. We know there's cats out there, but it suggests that there's really, really low densities of cats. The other thing is that it's probably super isolated. I mean, we have a highly human-dominated, altered landscape with 2.8 million people in this area. But those major highways, 580 and 680, are just killers for terrestrial habitat connectivity. Things just can't get across it. In contrast, I've been working a lot down in Patagonia. This is Torres del Paines National Park in Patagonia, and it's an incredible place. If you ever get the opportunity to go to Chile, it's absolutely fantastic. It's only one of many national parks in Chile. In fact, Tompkins Conservation, They have actually created 15 new national parks of 15 million acres of land. And that's in addition to Taurus alpines. This is a location where you can go and observe and watch pumas behave naturally in large open space expanses. And including close encounters. These cats are often, while you're out there photographing and observing them, they'll walk right up to you. There's a female that was hunting guanaco. She's within 5-10 feet of me. This young age female right there, I could have touched her. She walked up to me. I was sitting at a water hole. She walked up, took a drink, and walked right by me. So these cats are not nearly as ruthless, not nearly as aggressive. And what's amazing is that there hasn't been one human documented attack by a puma that killed a human being in South America. So what's happening in South America compared to North America? Why are the cats so much more schizo up in here in North America? The same species. Not only that is that we're able to observe puma social interactions down there, which is absolutely phenomenal. They share kills. This is also taking place in Tetons though, however. They're sharing kills. There'll be as many as 7 pumas on one kill. Some of the pumas are non-related. Females allow adult males to come up to the kills, and adult males sometimes will let unrelated females walk up and eat on the same kill they are. It's mind-blowing place to go watch carnivore ecology. But what really just gets me going is the Pantanal. This is the world's largest tropical freshwater wetland in the world. It's 195 square kilometers, and it encompasses Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay. And I've been going down there for quite a few years now. Unfortunately, only 5% of the Pantanal is protected. The other 95% is rangeland and ranch land. It has super high biodiversity, supports 58 species of amphibians, 98 species of reptiles, 656 species of birds, and 152 species of mammals, 90 being bats. And it's less than the third of the size of California. It's stunning. It's mind-blowing. What I've been doing is research on 3 semi-aquatic predators. It has the world's largest crocodilian population. These are jackery caiman, estimated 10 million caiman in those wetlands. That's one of the major drivers there. Giant river otter, an endangered species, about 2,000 to 5,000 giant river otters. And then of course, jaguar, the largest cat in the Americas, and it's the 3rd largest cat in the world. And it has the highest known densities of jaguars. It's a critically important area of South America. So one of the things we've been doing is research on jaguars there. Been working with Pantera, the Jaguar Identification Project. And these cats, what's remarkable about this place is like going to Galapagos, Patagonia, and Africa at the same time, because almost every single day we're watching these cats out hunting in the riverine systems. Jaguars before was thought to be truly a nocturnal species. These cats are active all day long. And sometimes it's a bloody 110 degrees out there with 90% humidity. They're swimming down the rivers, chasing after prey. It's insane. They take super dangerous prey. They consistently are catching these caiman. And some caiman are as big as 4, 5, 6 meters long. And they're diving into the river, catching them. Some of the jaguars are actually swimming underwater for 10, 20 meters in really turbid waters and coming up with a caiman. They have the strongest bite of all the big cats, even bigger than Bengal tiger. It's 1,500 pounds per square inch. So they just crush through the cranium of these caiman or turtles. You just hear a crunch and the animal is pretty much incapacitated. One of the things also is Pantera's been putting GPS radio collars on some of the cats, and then we have a massive camera trap array. And here's one of my cameras right here, and we can see here's an adult female with a young age cub. The jaguars spend a lot of time on the riverine systems, which there's the river right there. But then about 50% of the cats are up in the Gallery Forest, in the Cerrado, up in the uplands. We don't know that much about those cats. They're really hard to find and see. So we put cameras up. You guys are just spectacular. The Jaguar Identification Project has been working with Pantera for a long time, since 2013. And during that duration, they've identified, just in the North Pontonal, so a small region of the Pontonal wetlands, 377 individuals. Because you can identify them based on their unique spotting or rosette characteristics. So we take photographs, we observe them. They've also been looking at relatedness. So here's Kira, which is considered one of the major matriarchs up in the Pontonal. And there's all the offspring of Kira, the related individuals. And a lot of them are in the photographs. What's crazy is that most jaguars have yellow eyes. Some will have these orange amber eyes. And normally we thought that was being transferred from female to female. This little cub right here is believed to be a male, and he would be the first one with amber eyes, or orange eyes, yeah, amber. So it's a remarkable research effort going on. Citizen science too. So the ecotourists that are out there taking photos, submitting them, the researchers are, and the database is just tremendous. One of the things we're also doing, here's another solitary cat that we're documenting social behavior of. 2 males hunting together. It's very, very similar that you would expect to find in cheetahs. They're out hunting for several years in a row together, catching prey and defending themselves against bigger males. Male and females hunting together, and then philopatric females hunting together. Now, Pantera is a worldwide organization that deals with big cats. A very close friend of mine, Ellen Rabinowitz, and a closer friend of mine, Howard Quigley, started a Jaguar Initiative program. And here's the Pontonal way down there. This is showing you jaguar populations across South America, up into Central America, and up in the Americas, okay? And it shows you the critical corridor links are the ones that need to be maintained and maintain these populations, the Pontonal being a major source. And then it also shows you some of the areas that are needed to be really, really addressed, which are in the red. If you notice, as we go up to North America, even though we know that Arizona is supporting, has some jaguars dispersing up there, they consider that a sig population. A lot of ecologists, cat ecologists, don't really think it's worth the effort to put into it to try to get jaguars up into, maintained up in Arizona or California or elsewhere. But what's interesting is the jaguars here in Arizona and Mexico, their primary prey are black bears. I gotta get going because I'm going really slow. Giant otters. These otters are absolutely fantastic. They're 6 feet long. They weigh 80 pounds. They live in big family groups. They determine, thankfully I can't see the note way back there. They have these social groups that are just absolutely incredible. And you can ID them by their chin patterns, very similar to being able to identify jaguars. What's remarkable is the jaguar giant otter interactions. The otters tend to be the aggressors. And here's some of the data. We've been doing research on this for quite a while. Here's some of the data, and however, occasionally jaguars catch otters and kill them, and those are the 2 red blips up there. Okay, this data goes from 2007 to 2020. The last 2 years, we've documented 4 additional mortality of jaguars catching otters 4 more times. And we think it has to do with the drought and the riverine system shrinking. So this is in review, journal review, but we put it on hold because we might add that additional data. We don't want people reading this paper and not realizing that actually jaguars are predating on otters more often. The other 2 cats, I'm almost done, I'm wrapping up. The other 2 cats that are really major drivers are the subordinate cats. Ocelot, there's a thing called the ocelot effect. They're influencing all the other mesocarnivores across the Pontonal landscape. And then pumas are present. They're avoiding jaguars, but they're very, very present up in the more dry terrestrial habitats. However, this cat was swimming across a river, one of the largest rivers there called the Cuiva River, and it was swimming across a river that was 300 meters wide in the middle of the day. And I definitely don't have time for questions, so if you want to
Okay, well, I'm here to talk about my book, Beneath a Black and White Sky, A Year Among Condors at Pinnacles National Park. I guess I'll start with some background information. I've been fascinated by condors since I was a little boy. I remember being 7 years old, my grandparents taking me and my brother down to Disneyland for the first time. And to be honest with you, I couldn't care less about Mickey Mouse or rides. I was aware that condors flew over the mountains of near Los Angeles, and I remember driving through the grapevine and looking up and looking for condors. And needless to say, not surprising, I didn't see any. I'd have to wait several more years for that. So in 1984, I went down to Southern California with a group from Audubon, and I saw my first condor. That was at about a distance of 3 miles, and that was pretty cool, but not exactly fulfilling. I went back the next year in 1985 on my own, and I was there all by myself, and I waited 6 hours and 45 minutes without seeing anything, and then all of a sudden, right over the ridge, a condor flew right over my head about 50 feet. And it was a transcendental experience for me. It was, if I wasn't hooked before, I certainly was hooked then. It was kind of bittersweet though, because I thought to myself, well, things weren't going so well. The population at that time was down around 24, and they were in the process of bringing them all into captivity, not just for their own safety, but to establish a captive breeding program. So I thought to myself, you're never going to see this again. Fortunately, of course, I was wrong. In the 1990s, they began re-releasing condors, first in Southern California, but our story would start in Big Sur when Ventana Wildlife Society began releasing birds there. And in 2003, Pinnacles was selected as a second site in the region, and the Central California flock was established. So they started releasing birds there in 2003 on an annual basis, and I think I went to every one. They used to be open to the public. So then around 2010, there was an email looking for volunteers to serve on the Condor Project at Pinnacles, and I jumped all over that. So I basically have been at Pinnacles since 2010, coming in a couple times a week, weather permitting. Been there ever since. So how the book came to be was about this time of year in 2016, I'd finished my first book, and that was enough of an ordeal. I was done writing. And so I had a good friend come up to me and say, well, what's your next book about? And I looked at her and said, it ain't gonna be no next book. I said all that I had to say in the Diablo Diary. I got nothing left to talk about. Even if I did, what could I talk about with any degree of authority? She looks at me as if I'm crazy, and she goes, Joseph, you could write a book about condors. And I looked at her and I said, nah, there's at least a dozen books out there about condors. The world doesn't need another. Okay, so I went home and I thought about that, and I said, okay, yeah, there is a lot of books out there, but there was never a book written by an ordinary field person. The books that were written by people who were running the Condor program or by journalists who had access. So I thought, yeah, okay, maybe there is room for something that I could write. I thought, well, and also I also thought about a little bit different format, like taking 1 year on the project. So basically, that's what I did. I would go home at night, starting January 1st, 2017. I'd write up my field notes, and that's how it started. Now, field notes do not a book make. I can guarantee you there is nobody in this room who's going to want to sit through 80 entries of my field notes. Caitlin's probably the closest that's come to that. But yeah, field notes can be very tedious. So I had to try to find a way to make this as compelling and interesting as possible. So what I did was,
I basically talked, the early parts of the book are largely explanatory because releasing condors is a very complicated procedure. It's so much more than just letting the birds go and seeing where they go and how they do things. There is a lot of work behind the scenes to that, and the public has an appetite for that. I get asked questions. There are people who will sit with me and talk for an hour or two, asking question after question about what we do and how we do it. So basically, I'm explaining all the ins and outs of what we do, mostly in the first half of the book. In the middle of the book, I spend some time talking about lead poisoning, which is the biggest impediment to condor recovery and is the biggest source of mortality. So I thought there was a good need. All the literature that I've read have been peer-reviewed papers, which of course are great, but they don't really synthesize everything. So I'm trying to read all those things and put it all together and have a conversation about lead poisoning. So I do that in the middle of the book, and toward the end I kind of go off the charts here and I just start rambling about different things that come to my mind. So that being said, I'd like to, with the remaining time that I have, I'd like to just read to you some excerpts. So the first one that I'm going to read, I'm going to ask you a question here. I assume everyone in this room is familiar with National Geographic, right? Everybody's heard of National Geographic? Okay. How about the Beverly Hillbillies? It's an old TV show from the 60s. Okay. What if I was to tell you, here's a hot take, you could get better information about California condors by watching an episode of the Beverly Hillbillies than you can watching a National Geographic documentary. Now, after having said that, you probably think I'm a heretic and a lunatic. But I'm going to try to change your mind here. Okay. Oops, I guess I do need this. I watched a National Geographic special the other night about Big Sur. I'd seen it before, back when it came out in 2011, and I recalled it being questionable, so I decided to view it again with several years additional perspective under my belt. It did not age well. The photography, as you might expect, was top-notch, and the narration, featuring the sonorous tones of Hector Elizondo, was duly impressive. The copy, however, was atrocious, for it was painfully evident that no one proofread it for accuracy. Among the gaffes was an insinuation that turkey vultures prey on coyote pups. No, they don't. And that geological barriers have made it difficult for reptiles to move to Big Sur. When it came to condors, the information was no better. Viewers were informed that condors need to find food before turkey vultures do. That's not only nonsense, it's backwards. Condors often find food by locating vultures gathered at a carcass, and once condors land, they have no trouble displacing them. The program showed footage of condors feeding at the Big Sur bait site, while Hector reminded us that condors depend on humans for food. I wouldn't have said depend. Benefit from would have been more accurate. Then this inexcusable statement, quote, condors will never fully recover unless they learn to find their own food. Allow me to break it to Nat Geo. Condors are plenty capable of finding food. That bizarre statement would have you believe that starvation is the major obstacle to condor recovery. It also shifts the blame from humans onto condors for their condition. But for all the inaccuracies, the most aggravating was the documentary's baffling refusal to address lead poisoning. Millions of people may have viewed that documentary, and for many it might be the most detailed information they have ever received on condors. That's scary. A viewer might come away thinking that condors are overmanaged, too dependent on humans to survive on their own, and therefore not worth restoring. Meanwhile, their gravest threat was never even mentioned. I had to get the rancid taste of that documentary out of my mouth, and I found something in the most unlikely of places. A 1964 episode of the Beverly Hillbillies. Now, when I was in grade school, I watched reruns of the show when I got home, and somehow I remember all these years later that there was actually an episode featuring California condors. Funny how I can recall a half-hour TV show I saw 40 years ago, yet forget the password I created last week. The episode features Miss Hathaway and Professor P. Casper Biddle, played by Wally Cox. They belonged to the local chapter of a birding organization that was a parody of the Audubon Society and were dressed in uniforms that made Mr. Rogers look hip. They dropped by to visit the Clampetts and spoke with Granny and Uncle Jed. Miss Hathaway and the professor described condors to the Clampetts, and I have to admit the information they presented was pretty accurate. They said condors lived in caves and rock ledges, which describes most nest sites. They claimed the population was down to 40. That was probably an underestimate, but not by much. After watching both programs, I came to the stunning conclusion that a 1964 episode of the Beverly Hillbillies presented more accurate information about condors than a 2011 National Geographic documentary, and here's why. While arguing on behalf of condors, Miss Hathaway listed the threats they faced, claiming they were, quote, shot at, harassed, poisoned. There was no way the scriptwriters for the Beverly Hillbillies could possibly have been aware of the threat posed by lead poisoning. The first necropsies linking lead to condor deaths were 2 decades into the future. It may have been just speculation or a semi-educated guess, but it was remarkable that the Beverly Hillbillies, in 1964 no less, alerted the public to the idea that condors were being poisoned. It was both remarkable and regrettable that in 2011, with 3 decades and a mountain of data behind them, that National Geographic did not. How much time do I have? Okay, I'll go with another reading then here. Kind of along the same lines, kind of out in left field a bit. If I've heard it once, I've heard it dozens of times. Condors are amazing, but they're so ugly and gross. Ugly? Really? Why? Because they have no feathers on their head? Come on, people, you're better than that. I happen to be, shall we say, a little thin on top myself, so take my opinion with a grain of salt, but declaring condors ugly because they're bald is a weak take. There are a lot of other apt adjectives to describe how condors look. The red eyes make them appear menacing, while the black plumage gives them a gothic air. But ugly? Hell no. Condors aren't ugly, they're striking. As for gross, that's harder to refute, but I'd like to point out they're far from alone. Sure, condors feast on carrion, but so do noble eagles and brainy ravens. Bears and coyotes are more than happy to gorge on overripe carcasses, and even ground squirrels partake in roadkill. And if you own a dog, don't you dare call a condor gross. Place a calf carcass in your backyard and just watch what Mr. Belvedere does with it. At least condors wipe their faces after eating. Condors get a bad rap for being filthy, no doubt due to their all-carrion diet. I understand they don't gingerly pluck morsels with their talons and daintily dine. They plunge their whole head inside a body cavity anywhere they can, including there. Aside from feeding, however, condors are downright fastidious. They preen constantly, nibbling at feathers, grooming themselves. Immediately after feeding, it's typical to see a condor rub its head against a branch or the ground to wipe away the residue. And I have to say they do a better job of that than some people. Quite a few guys with beards could do well to follow the examples of condors. But above all, condors are serious bathers. They don't just dip their feet in, they submerge themselves completely. And let's face it, we all know some people who could use a good scrubbing. People also assume that condors smell atrocious. Maybe I'm hopelessly biased, or maybe I've been doing this too long, but I'm here to inform you that assumption is way off base. Condors don't smell. That's not to say they don't emit an odor. They do, but it's subtle, earthy, but distinct. I recognize it immediately whenever I detect it. You'll never smell it, though, unless you're actually holding a condor. For a bird that plunges its head deep inside rotting carcasses and shits all over its legs and feet, condors somehow manage to smell impressively inoffensive. Honestly, I prefer the smell of condors over any mammal that I can think of, including people. Too many colognes and perfumes are overpowering. I can't believe people pay good money for those fragrances and apply them on purpose. Makes me wonder what they're trying to cover up. And as for those who do without, well, I'll take my chances on a condor. I probably have been doing this for too long. So that's about all I got, but before I open for questions, I wanted to thank Save Mount Diablo, not just for allowing me to talk about my book, but also for the work they're doing for our Condor program at Pinnacles and for the Diablo Range in general. I'd like to thank Megan Nico as well. She's the illustrator. She's a fantastic artist, and you can find her at 7ravenstudio.com. And questions? Okay, I'll be available at break if you...
Before you get off then, your reference to Beverly Hillbillies is so spot on. This probably says something about my age, but what a great memory. I can't get out of my head now. And Miss Hathaway in her uniform.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's just... I remember it too.
Cool. Your grooming is impeccable too. It just, you know, yeah.
Where can someone find a copy of your book?
Basically on Amazon. We're trying to get, it should be available pretty soon in the Pinnacles bookstore. Also at the Henry Coe bookstore, there's maybe as many as 10 left. I gave them 10, so there might still be 10. So that's all I got. Okay, thanks.
So hi, I'm Caitlin Lopez. I'm a Condor crew lead at Pinnacles National Park, and today I'm going to talk to you about California condors and them exploring the Diablo and Gabilan ranges. Okay. So condors in Pinnacles National Park. Who has been to Pinnacles National Park? Nice, so many. Okay. Who has seen a condor at Pinnacles National Park? Nice. So all the condors at Pinnacles National Park are part of the Central California flock. We co-manage the flock with Ventana Wildlife Society. Right now we have 119. That's including the 6 that we got from the Oregon Zoo this past September. 3 of them have just been released on Monday, and there's interns as I speak watching them, trying to chase them around the park today. 44 of those are managed by Pinnacles. The rest are managed by Ventana. The condors have no idea who manages them. Some of them love Pinnacles, some of them love the coast, but a lot of them go in between. Right now, there's over 550 condors alive today. 350 of those are in the wild. The rest are in captivity for the breeding program or ambassadors and stuff like that. SoCal has around 105, 110. Arizona, Utah flock has around 102. There's another flock in Baja, Mexico that has around 35. And our newest release site in Humboldt area, managed by the Yurok tribe, has around 20-ish now. So yeah, quite a jump from the 20 we had in the 1980s. So it's great to see. So I like to say we're helicopter moms to the condors. We know who they're dating. We try to figure out where they're feeding. If they're sick, we try to help them as immediately as we can. So every condor is born and given a stud book number, and it's chronologically based on birth order. So number 1 is Topa Topa. He's 58 years old, born in 1966. One of those from the 20 originally captured. And then our youngest one, born in May, is 1318. And so the color for the vinyl tags signifies the first number and second number of the stud book number. So 900s are tan and 300s are blue. So 986 is on the left and 375 is on the right. It's a little confusing now because now we have 1200 and 1300, and those have like a line underneath. So 1318 will be a blue tag, but with a line under 18. For tracking condors, we use visual observations and radio telemetry and GPS. So you can see 986 is sporting that nice radio telemetry tracking device, and the 375 is supporting that clunky GPS where you can actually see the solar panel battery. So visual observations, that's us going in the field and hiking, or it's you guys sending us pictures and we seeing who's out there and reading the tags for you all. We also have remote cameras at our bait sites. That's the one on the right. I hear these two playing with each other. We also recently partnered or work with UC San Diego's Alert California cameras. Those are public. Anyone can go find them on Google and stuff. They are used for wildfire smoke to detect wildfires, but recently our condors have loved the communication towers that a lot of them are on. And yeah, the Alert California people are getting a kick out of all the weird faces that they've been making on the cameras, both in the Southern California flock and our flock. This one was taken near the hills east of Hollister area. So with radio tracking, usually someone like Joseph, he's our best tracker, by the way, goes out and to high places and takes signals every hour and searches for all of them that have radio transmitters. Every bird is given a radio transmitter, but they usually die within 2 to 5 years, the battery, that is. It has some limitations because someone physically has to go out there. We don't have a way to passively do radio telemetry right now. GPS monitoring is more passive. We get reports, and the GPSs we have right now are based on satellite information, and they're given hits every hour. We have had ones in the past that are cellular towers, but there's very few cell towers near Pinnacles and above and below. And we have had ones that do it every 5 minutes, but that's just an overload of data. We have a great number of condors that have GPS right now, but they sometimes die. And we try to get all the females with GPSs because we can find nests. And so GPSs really help us locate nests and make sure they're still active, making sure the parents still go to the nest. They alert possible threats. We can see the communication towers on Google Earth. And so we weren't sure exactly if this was a problem or not. Or mortalities. If a bird is still for too long, we get alerts and we can go out there right away to see if it's sick or if it's dead. And it tracks notable big flights like the Mount Diablo flight that they did this past year. So I have some maps for you guys. So I picked the summer months because that's really when condors explore the most. The days are long, the thermals are really good because of the hot weather. The chicks are old enough to where they can defend themselves from big nest predators, but they're not yet fledging. They usually fledge in October and November. So the parents come back for that time and make sure they do their first flights well. But those that nest failed or didn't nest that year have room, they have no responsibilities. The ones that are right on the cusp of adulthood will explore a little bit more too and try to find new territories. And so I picked 2021 as a graph to contrast with 2024 because that is when 828 made it to Mount Diablo back in 2021. Just looking at these two maps, you can see that there's a bunch of red hits in the Southern California area. That is actually Condor 1027. She was born in Pinnacles. She's my favorite condor because I watched her from an egg to a chick to a flying condor. She made a trip down to SoCal flock in 2023, made a couple trips back and forth, but this year she's just staying down there and was actually handled by the SoCal flock team. They track her, she's going to their bait sites. She's just a SoCal condor bird now. But I wanted to point out, south of Pinnacles National Park is this area called Bitterwater. That's a historical hotspot for condors, especially the old ones from Ventana. They loved that area. and we're starting to see less and less activity down there, and more activity up north near Pacheco Pass, the hills east of San Jose area. And here's a closer look. If it works. Okay. So the Pacheco Pass area is especially a hot spot right now, the pass between Gilroy and the San Luis Reservoir, Los Baños area. We've seen condors stay there for a couple of days, a week. They love the communication towers up there. We're not sure why they're hanging out there. We don't know if it's a trend that's gonna stay or if they're just there for a couple of years. We're not exactly sure. Joseph and I speculate on it all the time. But you can really see in 2021, 828 was not really with anyone else when she went up there. There was no real activity around here, especially in the Pacheco Pass area. There's a couple of condors exploring. There's another flight over there, but not too much activity. And it was a real trendsetter of 828 to explore up there versus all these birds, all these hits, especially this area east of Hollister, east of Gilroy, all those hills that are nice and conducive for condor flights that they've just been taking a liking to recently. And so the Mount Diablo flight, I have little arrows showing exactly where the flight was taking place and which direction they went. So 7 condors on August 18th did a big flight up from the San Jose Alumni Rock Hills area up towards Mount Diablo, and all 7 of them actually went to the Lime Ridge open space, probably saw all of this and then turned back. 3 of them left by August 19th, but a couple of them stayed another couple of days. Weirdly, 1021, the turquoise dot right here, must have joined them, must have saw them and kind of joined them up there, but everyone else did that nice flight together up there. And this is only the birds with GPSs, so there might have been more. I think we got a picture of a bird that was around here that didn't have a GPS, so there's likely more that went up there and we just don't know about it. So nest monitoring, one of the big things for the Condor program is documenting births and deaths. So nest monitoring, condors luckily have a nice GPS pattern of one parent's on the nest doing nothing but incubating, occasionally stretching their wings, but not eating, not going out anywhere, just staying and incubating the little baby chick or the egg for 3 days. And then the next parent comes and switches with them and they take the 3-day shift. So you can really see on GPS and through our tracking and observations that there's one condor just there constantly. This condor right here is the first hatchling of the Pinnacles National Park this year. That one is only a day oldish, and you can see the father has that nice sporting GPS, 868, first time dad. I have a video that I think will play. Nice, okay. So this is one of the cavities. This is 1275 from the last picture. She's around 2.5 years old, or 2.5 months old at this point, flapping her wings, getting those strong muscles. I wanted to show you the rock cavity kind of nest, what it looks like inside. So we actually went inside to put in the cameras and fit 4 people in that nest. So it's quite a big cavity. And prairie falcons have actually used that in the past. So that's probably why a lot of their historic whitewash around here. But 868 and 931 took it over this year and raised successfully this chick. This chick on Wednesday was flying around for several minutes by itself with its parents sometimes, but by itself other times. So it's doing very well right now. We have had a historic record for Central California nests this year. We have 9 fledglings, we suspect. 5 of them have been visually confirmed. We've seen them fly. They're doing great. 4 of them are based on GPS and radio tracking and how frequent the parents show up at the bait sites. We can see from GPS that they're continuing going to their nest site for a decent amount of time. So on the flip side of birth is death, mortality. lead poisoning is still the #1 reason for death in condors. The lead bullets fragmentize very easily in carcasses, and they make these tiny pinpoint fragments that you could barely see from a naked eye, but they just wipe out the condors. This graph is from US Fish and Wildlife. It's almost a year old now. They put out a graph every year based on the population number, so we'll get one in a couple of months. But from 1992 to 2023, all of the wild condor deaths, 48% of them have been from lead poisoning, which is a huge number. But I did want to point out the 11% predation. At 11%, that is mostly chicks that are not old enough to defend themselves, or maybe the parent died, or maybe their parents aren't watching them very closely. And so that's a big reason why chicks die, is predation. Another 11% is illness and disease, which significantly increased due to avian influenza, H-Pi in the Arizona flock. We are still keeping a very tight eye on avian influenza. It's still something we're navigating, and especially with cows in Central California being tested positive for that, we're keeping a very close eye on it. But so far, we've tested every condor we handled, and none have had H-Pi so far. If you see a condor, condorspotter.com is a great way for you to figure out which condor you saw. If you're still unsure, or you just want to tell us, you can email us at pin_condors@nps.gov. That's especially helpful in the Bay Area because we have really no one in the Bay Area. So if you have any pictures of condors in the Bay Area or near Casa de Fruta, we got some previously in the summer from people that were just birding in Casa de Fruta area, and we got to see some condors that hardly are ever seen in Pinnacles. So that was really cool. We want to know your sighting. And that's it for me. Thank you, Save Mount Diablo, and for allowing me to present on condors and continuing the contribution to condor recovery. And any questions? Yes.
Gabilan, are you familiar with the effort to try to reintroduce condors up in Sonoma County, Sonoma Coast?
No, I have not heard of that, to be honest. Okay.
David, would you just remind people what Save Mount Diablo's contribution is?
Yes, they have given us so many GPSs, and so that's why I presented a little bit more on the GPS side, which is very helpful in so many ways. Mortalities, nest observations, and seeing those big flights. And it's really exciting that so many of them went to Mount Diablo this year. I hope that they continue going north because there's a lot of good cliffs out there that they can nest in, and especially using old falcon or old eagle nests would be great up there.
Years ago, I went to a Ventana visit, and there had been a hypothesis at the time that condor predation or attacks were causing mortality, especially older condors attacking younger. Has there been any advance on that?
So there's one condor in particular, Redwood Queen 190, that has been known to kill condors, young condors, especially chicks that just fledged. She is mainly the only one. Sometimes the condors, when they're super sick, the others will attack it just as like an animal instinct kind of thing. We haven't seen that much of that at Pinnacles. I'm trying to think of like older, like bullying younger ones to the point of death. They always fight, but it's never like contact where it's bleeding or anything. I know 190 has been known to be a little.
Yeah, she's like drove other condors into the trees.
Yeah, she's cool but crazy. That's it. Cool.
Thank you so much.
So my name is Vishal Subramanian, and my presentation is on using camera traps to understand mountain lion habitat use in the Diablo Range. So a little bit about me. Sean already did a great introduction. I'm an undergraduate in ecology and statistics at UC Berkeley. I'm a wildlife photographer, storyteller, and researcher, and I collaborate with environmental organizations like Save Mount Diablo for wildlife conservation issues in the Bay Area. Now, I wanted to start this presentation with this picture of a mountain lion crossing a stream not too far from Mount Hamilton. To me, this photo almost represents the Diablo Range in a way. It shows our apex predator of the region, the mountain lion, crossing one of the many perennial streams that zigzag all throughout the valleys of the Diablo Range in some pristine oak woodland habitat that's so characteristic of this amazing area. To me, it captures that sense of curiosity, wonder, and awe that we feel when we think about the Diablo Range. Now, my passion for the Diablo Range started in my early teens. That's when I picked up a camera for the first time and started taking pictures of wildlife. I spent pretty much every free second I had in the hills photographing animals like bobcats, owls, badgers. But one animal that always really fascinated me was mountain lions. And about midway through college, I decided I really wanted to capture a photograph and tell stories about Diablo Range mountain lions. But as I set up my DSLR camera traps, which are these motion-triggered DSLR cameras, I waited for months and months, and I never captured any images. And it made me realize just how little I know about how mountain lions utilize habitat in this area. So it made me interested in researching this, not only so I could get photographs and tell stories about these animals, but also provide valuable data to land conservationists and scientists who are actively working to ensure a thriving mountain lion population in the Diablo Range. So this was around the time I saw the announcement for the Mary Bowerman Science and Research Program, and I applied for the grant to study exactly this. How do mountain lions utilize habitat in the Diablo Range? And the study site I chose was Blue Oak Ranch Reserve, just north of Mount Hamilton. This is a really pristine part of the Diablo Range. It's a UC Berkeley-run natural reserve, and it's only open to scientists and for public, education events and things like that. And it's really just a spectacular place, and it also has amazing connected habitat both north and south, making it an ideal habitat for mountain lions and to do research like this. So we've chose 3 primary habitat types found in the reserve: riparian or creek habitats, ridgetops, and grassland habitats. And we ended up setting 10 trail cameras across the reserve. So we can see the blue represents the riparian habitats, the red is grassland, and the green is ridgetop. And we started setting up cameras in late February of this year. And almost immediately, we started capturing some pretty interesting and valuable data. So this was a mountain lion at one of our grassland sites in the middle of the day. It was pretty remarkable to see him just out and about, such a healthy, robust individual. And we weren't just looking at mountain lions, but we were also looking at all the other species in this, mammal species in this ecosystem, and how they were also utilizing these landscapes. So that includes mesopredators like bobcats, other mesopredators like coyotes. And one thing we were also looking at and we were also looking at prey animals like deer and pigs, which serve as the main food source for mountain lions in this region. And after about having the cameras up for 6 months, we took them down and started organizing our data. So throughout the course of the study, we captured 355 mule deer detections, 198 coyote detections, 167 bobcat detections, 73 wild pig detections, and 54 mountain lion detections, which was higher than I would have initially expected when setting up the cameras. And then we started doing our analysis. So the main questions we wanted to answer were: 1, which habitats did mountain lions seem to prefer? 2, how does other mammal spatial use relate to which areas the mountain lions are using? And then we also did a temporal analysis, seeing when other animals were active in relation to when mountain lions were active, like in times of day. So this was our initial graph looking at which habitats, like the frequency of mountain lion detections by habitat. So this is detections per camera per day. And we can see that overwhelmingly they seem to be using the riparian corridors, which isn't surprising because it has resources like water and food, and it also provides cover for hunting. The next thing we looked at was to see how mesopredators like bobcats and coyotes utilize this habitat. So we saw that coyotes and bobcats pretty much showed an opposite trend, favoring the grassland habitats and utilizing riparian habitats the least, which makes sense because mountain lions are known to frequently predate on coyotes and sometimes on bobcats. So it shows spatial avoidance between the mesopredator and the apex predator, which is the mountain lion. We also looked at the habitat use of prey items like deer and pigs, and we found that this more closely related to where we found mountain lions, which makes sense as they'd be in areas where their prey is found. The next thing we did was a temporal analysis, looking at what times of day these animals were active in relation to each other. So over here you have the red curve showing the mountain lion, blue coyote, the yellow is bobcat, and the green is gray fox. And the x-axis shows from pretty much the start of the day to the end of it. And from this initial graph, we noticed that coyotes and bobcats seem to be actively avoiding mountain lions in terms of their temporal activity. So we specifically isolated mountain lions and coyotes, and we got a significant result, a p-value of 0.001, showing that coyotes were pretty much most active at the times mountain lions were least active, and when mountain lions were most active, coyotes were they're at their least activity period. And a similar trend also showed for bobcats. But we wanted to take this one step further. We wanted to see how this could have cascading impacts on the ecosystem. So we also looked how bobcats and coyotes were impacting even smaller predators like gray foxes. So this is a graph showing the bobcat displacement on gray fox. And pretty much what these four curves represent is gray fox activity at different sites. And the darker the curve, it means that there was more bobcat detections at that particular site. And what we found was at sites with the highest amount of bobcat detections, gray foxes, their activity fluctuated a lot depending on when the bobcats were active, because we can see the curve when the bobcats were active with the dotted yellow curve. But in areas with less bobcat activity, gray fox's activity remained pretty constant throughout the day, showing how these bobcats were impacting when gray foxes were active. And we noticed a pretty similar trend with coyote displacement on gray fox, also yielding a significant value. And it really goes to show the role that mountain lions are playing as apex predators in the ecosystem and how they're impacting everything below them. So the mountain lions impact the coyotes and the bobcats, which impact the gray foxes, which likely impact small mammals in the ecosystem. So yeah, it goes to show the really important role of these mountain lions in these ecosystems. We also did a time series analysis looking at the rate of detections over the entire duration that the cameras were up. And we found that for this, most of the mammal species followed a pretty similar trend with higher amounts of detections during the starting time period and then again towards the end, and more research would need to be done to figure out what exactly caused this. So what does this data tell us? So I'd like to say this data shows us potential trends and preferences. It doesn't provide a robust scientific conclusion just because it was conducted in a relatively small area, but it does tell us that mountain lions seem to have a preference for riparian habitat, and as apex predators, they impact the whole ecosystem below them. And preserving land, which connects riparian corridors, and implementing land management practices that ensures healthy riparian ecosystems is essential. And what more do we need to learn? So we could conduct wider scale camera trapping to see if these trends hold in different areas of the Diablo Range, and further investigate these top-down impacts of mountain lions on other animals, and identify specific parcels to preserve that connect habitat in the Diablo Range for mountain lions and other species. So I'd like to make some acknowledgements. So thanks to Save Mount Diablo for this amazing program and hosting this event. I really learned a lot throughout this process, and I'm really grateful for all the support of the people at Save Mount Diablo. I'd also like to thank the UC Berkeley College of Natural Resources and my many mentors there who've helped me throughout this process. Specifically, I'd like to thank Zach Harlow, who's here in the audience today. He's the director of Blue Oak Ranch Reserve, and he served as a mentor during this whole project and opened up Blue Oak Ranch to conduct the study. I'd like to thank Sean Burke, the land programs director at Save Mount Diablo, for working with me through this whole process and giving really helpful advice on the proposal. I'd also like to thank Malcolm Sproul, the chair of the Mary Bowerman Science and Research Committee, for working with me on the proposal in its early stages to make sure everything looked right and we could come up with the best scientific study possible. And Steve Bobzien for also helping me create the proposal and working with me and mentoring me throughout the process. And then I'd like to finish with a couple of bloopers from the study. So we had multiple terabytes of data throughout, and most of the videos looked like this, just the grass blowing in the wind. Now, anybody who's camera trapped out there has probably experienced this. Like, this is what 90% of your videos look like, if not more. And we also had quite a few issues with cows. They seem to love knocking down the cameras. So there was like a couple of month process where we had to figure out how to cow-proof the cameras the best we could, which also worked for the pigs who liked messing with the cameras as well. So I had to visit the site much more often than I expected just because the cows kept knocking down the cameras. And so this video, so if you're wondering what's in the creek there, that's my camera. So I set up my DSLR camera trap along this creek to capture an image of a mountain lion crossing the stream. And I also had the trail camera that I was using for the study nearby to record animals as they came by. And we received one of these massive atmospheric rivers that have been so common in the Bay Area the last few years, completely inundating my camera, causing it to fall over into the creek. And the trail camera recorded the very mountain lion I was trying to photograph, jumping across the stream using my camera as a stepping stone. Talk about insult to injury. Funnily enough, this video has more views than any of my mountain lion photos combined. 41 million views on Instagram. And lastly, I'd like to show this video of a beautiful young female mountain lion at one of our camera sites, walking through in the middle of the day. To me, this represents what I want the Diablo Range to be, a place where apex predators like mountain lions can roam at any time of day, free of concerns from roads or any other kinds of disturbance. And I think this is the Diablo Range we can work to achieve with Save Mount Diablo. Thank you. Yeah, Kenichi.
Really great work, Michelle. I was wondering, like you mentioned, so you sort of showed that the mountain lions that have permits for riparian habitat. You mentioned that there's water availability, there's more prey there, potentially get more cover. Have you done any like attempt to separate those factors or know about other litters that might sort of, as we were talking about earlier, I'm super curious about why there's so many mountain lions on Diablo, and maybe it's the highway barriers, but it occurred to me that maybe it's water availability or quality water availability.
I haven't done any more in-depth study on those specific variables yet. I think it's something that would definitely be very cool to do. I mean, one thing I've noticed just through anecdotal observations is the areas where I capture mountain lions the most are definitely areas where there's water available, especially in a place like Blue Oak Ranch, which has pretty scarce water in the summertime especially. There's so much activity concentrated around those pools of water. In fact, this exact picture was taken at one of those rock ponds, which I had a camera up here along the whole summer, and it captured mountain lions basically every week. So it definitely seems possible that if there's a lack of quality water somewhere, it could be a deterring factor for mountain lions. I'm not aware of any literature into that. I'm sure there's something out there. It's something I'd love to look into more too. Yes.
You saw 54 sightings of mountain lions. Can you tell how many mountain lions there actually are there and how much duplication there is in your sightings?
Yeah, so it's really hard to tell specifically how many mountain lions were out there. I will say there was mostly males. You can tell if it's a male or a female generally just by the size of the head and stuff. And based off the tattered scars on different males, because they most have different kind of scarring, I was only able to tell with my high quality DSLR cameras, which is something I only had 1 or 2 of, so it wasn't a ton. But from what I could tell, I was capturing at least 3 different males and 2 different females across the sites, but it's possible it could have been more. And one thing we found was the males would often be mating with different females in the same area. So we could see sometimes 2 females in the same area, and a male, the male was with 1, and then 2 weeks, like 3 weeks later, it would have been with another. Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering if your site has any cattle troughs for the cattle there, and if you thought about using camera traps for those parts of your site.
That's a great question. It does have cattle troughs, but I did not add cameras to those, and it's probably something that would have been good to do. I think like I was trying to place my cameras in like a standard way across all sites, which was just typically along like a game trail. So like, I'm not sure if that would have worked with like the methodology of this particular study, but it's definitely something I would like love to investigate in the future.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, I could say welcome, but this is the end of the program, so I won't do that. I've had really the honor to be the chair of the Mary Bowerman Science and Research Committee for a number of years. And to remind everybody, the committee is named after Mary Bowerman, a botanist who is one of the founding members of Save Mount Diablo and really influential in the work that we have done as an organization since it was founded in the early 1970s. And I just wanted to remind people about Mary and the importance of her to us. The committee that we have, the Mary Bowerman Science and Research Committee, really has one primary function, and that's to administer from a very sort of overall perspective this colloquium and the grant program that we have to try to foster research on Mount Diablo and the surrounding Diablo Range. And that we get grant proposals. We have some in hand already. Next week, I believe, we meet to evaluate them. And we will then get another round going. We had many of the presenters here today who are grant awardees. And it's really satisfying to see the work that they're doing. I don't know about everybody else, but Vishal said it at the beginning of his program speech or presentation. Wow, this has been really good. And it's just so nice to see something that started as a small idea grow to something like this. And we've got a room full of people. You know, there's a lot of folks that have shown up and it really fosters what we want to do, which is one, to get research underway on and around the mountain and the rest of the range, but also then to bring it to the public and present that, not just have it in an academic publication, but to get it out to everybody. And so to see so many people here, all I can say is thank you very much for coming. I also want to recognize the committee members that I know are here. And I'll ask you just to raise your hand. I won't embarrass you to stand up, but Doug Bell, Beth Burnside, Kip Will, Keith, Keith, I can't even remember your name anymore. Don't worry. Steve Balling, and then we have our staff with Sean, Seth, and Kendra. So they're all here. So just as a conclusion, because I think we probably have some food now, that I want to thank all of the speakers. I think you guys have done a terrific job. And so, and as one of the other speakers mentioned, you really can't put on a program like this without the staff that Save Mount Diablo has, who do a great job, as well as the volunteers that aren't on staff, give their time to help a program like this exist. And then finally, we have sponsors. And then, of course, everybody that's attended today. And I'm going to go back to a couple things that, or one in particular, and Joseph, you've just completely blown my mind, to bring up the Beverly Hillbillies and to remember, you know, not only Jed and Grammy and Jethro and Daisy, but by God, the Mrs., was it Wainwright? Miss Hathaway, and that little crazy guy who I guess is Wally Cox. I'm going to have to go back and find that episode and watch it. So thank you again for all attending.